Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Wang Zihan. Coming up in this edition, U.S. law enforcement officers and protesters have clashed for a fourth consecutive day in Los Angeles over immigration raids. Delegates at the UN Ocean Conference are calling for an end to bottom trawling and stronger protections for the world's increasingly overexploited marine ecosystems. And Chinese technology is showing promising results in helping to mitigate the impact of algae blooms in Malaysia. We begin in the Americas. U.S. law enforcement officers and protesters are clashing for a fourth day over immigration raids in Los Angeles. President Donald Trump has sent an additional 2,000 National Guard soldiers to the city, bringing the total to 4,000. His administration has also ordered about 700 Marines. The protest began on Friday when federal immigration agents detained people across multiple locations. Local officials have warned that additional military pressure will only incite violence and spread fear. Tony Waterman has more from one of the protest sites in Los Angeles.
This brown and white building is the Federal Immigration Center, and there was this standoff between a crowd of a couple hundred and a group of National Guards troops and other law enforcement. That group of a couple hundred then merged with another group of a couple hundred that the police had separated out, and they made their way to the white building right behind. That is the Metropolitan Detention Center, and that is where some of the migrants who were rounded up in those raids on Friday are now being held. It had been a very quiet start to the day here in Los Angeles. There was not a lot of protesting after we had those very dramatic scenes playing out on Sunday when you had demonstrators, according to law enforcement, throwing things like concrete and bottles at police officers and in return being met with flashbangs, tear gas, and even some rubber bullets. There's been police coming in constantly, moving this crowd around, pushing them into new locations. And we have gotten word from the federal government, from the military, that about 700 active duty Marines have also now been mobilized. They will be joining the 2,000 National Guards troops who have already been deployed to Los Angeles. Only about 300 of them on the ground at this point. But the president saying that this is going to help quell these protests. The officials here in Los Angeles and across California actually say that bringing in additional military troops is only going to incite more violence. It's going to spread fear around this city. This is a city of immigrants. This is the second largest city in the United States, and more than a third of the individuals who live here were not born in the United States. So this has really been a center for this crackdown on immigration and the rounding up of migrants. But the scenes playing out here also now taking place in other cities across the U.S.
That was Tony Waterman reporting in L.A. Meanwhile, Frank Contreras has spoken to a young protester in Los Angeles who was wounded by a rubber bullet.
We're in the epicenter now between clashes taking place here among protesters, mostly young people from Los Angeles, and a large number of police right around the corner who have been firing tear gas and rubber bullets into the crowd for several hours now. The situation is increasingly tense here on the fourth night of clashes among protesters and police units here in this part of Southern California. The government of President Donald Trump has declared a state of emergency. They're saying that it's time now to send more troops here to the area, to this part of California, basically calling these young people here professional troublemakers, people who are hired to protest. A lot of the protesters that we've been speaking with here at this location in Los Angeles tell us that no, they're actually just young people who are trying to defend what they think is democracy in the United States. I want to introduce you to a young man who lives in Los Angeles. His name is Matthew. Hi, Matthew. Thank you very much. Matthew was shot in the leg. How did that take place, Matthew? What happened?
I was sitting there peacefully protesting like everybody else, holding the line like everybody was, and then all of a sudden they tell us to push back, and then I'm literally walking backwards, and out of nowhere I get shot in the leg. And out of nowhere, I did nothing wrong. I was peacefully protesting like everybody else here, and yeah. And now there's only a couple people throwing water bottles, and when someone throws a water bottle, they think it's an excuse to hit somebody with a shield or with the batoon or anything like that.
Do you believe the situation is escalating here?
As the night goes on, it will continue escalating for sure, 100%.
Thank you, Matthew, 26-year-old from Los Angeles here, who was recently shot by a rubber bullet here in this part of Los Angeles. Thank you for speaking with us.
Yes, sir. Appreciate
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. That's Matthew, one of many people who have suffered gunshot wounds here. These are from rubber bullets. They're supposedly non-lethal, but the damage done to his body there was quite evident. The clashes will continue, and people are just standing by here to see what happens next.
That was Frank Contreras reporting. The protests are also spilling over into Mexico, with demonstrators gathering outside the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City to express support for immigrants in the U.S. Alistair Boverstock has more from the capital.
Here, outside the US Embassy in Mexico City, protesters are showing their support for the Hispanic community in Los Angeles. As President Donald Trump sends around 2,000 National Guard troops to quell the protests in California, citizens here in Mexico's capital are denouncing what they call the repression and human rights violations of their brothers and sisters in the US. Many here see the National Guard deployment as racism against the Hispanic community.
Somos migrantes apoyando.
We are migrants supporting our brothers and sisters in the United States who have been subjected to a brutal and criminal persecution. It follows the Trumpist method of generating fear, instability, terror, and persecution, even within his own country.
Protesters here say Mexico's relationship with its northern neighbour has deteriorated significantly since Donald Trump's return to the White House. And that the decision to send the military to control the demonstrations is a step too far. The volume of US dollar remittances, tourism and trade between the two countries are all down significantly since January. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum shared her administration's view of the events in Los Angeles.
We do not agree with these actions which violate the human rights of migrants and criminalise honest working people who help the US economy. Around half of the residents of Los Angeles are of Hispanic heritage, and through diplomatic channels and our local consulates, our role is to help however we possibly can.
As the world watches events unfold in LA, many Mexicans are more concerned about the safety of their friends and family in Los Angeles, as LA's anti-deportation clashes show no sign of slowing up.
That was Alistair Boverstock in Mexico City. In Europe, the third UN Ocean Conference is underway in Nice, France. Participants have urged efforts to end bottom trawling for fish and bolster protections for the world's overexploited marine environments. Chinese Vice President Han Zheng outlined 4 proposals on sustainable ocean governance while addressing the general debate. He also met French President Emmanuel Macron, saying China is willing to strengthen bilateral and multilateral strategic communication and coordination with France. Sarah Coase has more from Nice.
It seemed to be a very friendly meeting. The two men sitting down, shaking hands. We then did hear from China's Vice President. He addressed this delegation on day one of this ocean conference. He said that China looks forward to working with all parties to better conserve and sustainably harness resources for better implementation of the SDGs and for the ocean to contribute more to humanity's sustainable development. He also outlined 4 key suggestions. These are making the ocean peaceful and secure, a universal, beneficial and prosperous agreement to make the ocean a shared space where civilians meet and flourish together, and finally, to make the ocean clean and beautiful. Now, there are many, many people here in Nice. It is absolutely buzzing. There are thousands of people attending this third Oceans Conference, 50 heads of state, but certainly one very noticeable absence, and that is, of course, of the United States after the new administration pulled out of all climate-related agreements back in January, really trying to turn promises into protection. And this is after a number of dire warnings that we have been hearing from the United Nations about the state of the ocean. Now, ratifications have actually been pouring in, and this is something that the French President Emmanuel Macron has been very optimistic about. He's been saying that he's hopeful that this could actually come into play before the end of the year. Let's take a listen.
Les activités humaines seront donc davantage encadrées, certaines interdites. Human activities will therefore be more regulated and some will be prohibited. Fishing techniques like bottom trawling, as well as all mining activities, will be restricted in these zones, which have been mapped out based on scientific data in consultation with our fishermen.
He's also hoping to get a moratorium on deep seabed mining, something that not too much is known about. And as we go to air, there have been 37 countries signing on to that. So certainly there is optimism here as this conference gets underway that some of these key goals can be achieved. And we did hear from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres when it does come to the issue of deep sea mining. He said that we cannot let this become the Wild West.
That was Sarah Coates reporting. And finally, in Asia, blooms of harmful algae, commonly called red tide, can have devastating impacts on human health and on agriculture, wiping out entire fish farms in a single night. China's Institute of Oceanology has developed a treatment that is showing promising results in mitigating the impact of the algae, and is working with Malaysian experts to use that technology in the country. Ryan Meltzer has more.
Malaysian researchers gather water samples on the country's northeast coast. Their lab here is a hub for research on the numerous species of harmful algae, some of which cause red tide. Excessive growth of harmful algae can make shellfish toxic for humans to consume, or starve fish of oxygen, causing mass die-offs and painful economic losses to fish farmers.
Scientists believe that climate change will lead to more frequent harmful algae blooms or red tides, increasingly threatening people's health and livelihoods, as well as food security.
Just like with the analogy of this fire prevention system, the farmer or the agriculture operator need to equip themselves with the technology and know-how to prepare for all this occurrence.
Malaysian researchers are teaming up with Chinese scientists to test a modified clay technology developed in China to combat red tide and other harmful blooms of algae.
The harmful algal blooms is a kind of ecological disaster. We just introduced this kind of cutting-edge harmful algal bloom controlling technologies to several countries, including the United States, Peru, or Turkey and Malaysia, Singapore, etc.
Scientists in China have modified the surface of the clay particles so that they more efficiently bind with the harmful algae, causing them to settle on the floor of the ocean or lake.
There are so many approaches could be used to kill these organisms, but we wish to use some very green and environmental friendly technologies. So we just use the clay, and the clay, is from the natural soil. So the major ingredient is very green and environmental friendly. And after the treatment and the removal efficiency of the cyanobacterial organisms could reach over 90% within only 10 or 15 minutes.
We would like to use it and test it with different algae species in our local settings, and to see how efficient they are in the removal. And of course, we hope that this technology will be helpful to the aquaculture industry. When occurrence of algal bloom happens, they can immediately use this to remove the algal bloom from the culture area. We are looking forward for these collaborations to be very fruitful and very useful to mitigate the harmful effect of the algal bloom.
Bringing hope that a green technology from China can help keep the red from Malaysia's waters.
That was Ryan Meltzer reporting. Recapping today's headlines, US law enforcement officers and protesters have clashed for a fourth consecutive day in Los Angeles over immigration raids. Delegates at the UN Ocean Conference are calling for an end to bottom trawling and stronger protections for the world's increasingly overexploited marine ecosystems. And Chinese technology is showing promising results in helping to mitigate the impact of algae blooms in Malaysia. That's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports, and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Wang Zihang. Thank you for listening.